sometimes also people are just biased. They want somebody to be a certain type because they view a certain type a certain way. It's more of a personal thing, but like it may not be necessarily true about how that type actually shows up. It's just because they feel like that type is a certain way. What's up, y'all? So I want to kind of talk about this strange phenomenon where um, people like, okay, people who spend a lot of time learning about cognitive functions, right? That's what you're supposed to do. That's actually great, of course. That's the core of learning about Myers Briggs. But there's problem I see arise from people who really spend all the time on learning cognitive functions. They'll know cognitive functions, but a lot of times the people who know cognitive functions really well, a lot of times they're some of the worst at typing um, people. Like maybe not people in I can't really say if they're bad at typing people that they know in real life, but they could be. Um, but like they can be some of the worst at typing like celebrities, fictional people, or typing you in that same way in any situation. Um, because like so first of all, that's like a very like that's not what you would expect. You would expect the people that know cognitive functions the best to be the best at typing people um, in every situation, right? But that actually tends to not be the case, um, and it's not what you would expect it to be, right? It's a very weird phenomenon. I've always like been so perplexed by that because it's like why do people who know cognitive function so well tend to not be good at typing people actually? Like they'd be the worst. They make the like worst conclusions. Like they'll have all the reasons and stuff to back it up, but like um it just won't be right. You know what I mean? Like the reason for that is I think I've been wondering why this happens for a very long time, and it's really just really strange, right? But the way that I can best guess why that is, I just think when people learn all this stuff about cognitive functions, right? I think they tend to just overcomplicate things when they type people. Um, People forget that typing people really isn't rocket science. Um, it's more has a lot to do with just understanding people, and then um, it's like people tend to like. I think another part of it is people will learn about cognitive functions, and then they just completely forget about common pattern recognition involving types, like simple patterns, like the simple patterns. Even though it's not true 100% of the time, they could be like simple patterns that can be spotted, and you can use those patterns and then know like, okay, this type tends to be like that in most situations. This type is most likely to be like that. It can give you a little bit of a shortcut to like guess what somebody type is sometimes, right? But a lot of times people don't have a lot of experiential knowledge. They just kind of just have a lot of book knowledge on certain things. I think that's a part of it. But you know the crazy thing is, a lot of times complete beginners are better at typing celebrities and fictional people than people who study cognitive functions for a long time. I think I'm an exception to that. I actually I think have remained quite balanced in both instances. Um, because I think mainly because I'm aware that of that problem, so I try to proactively. I don't know, maybe it's because I proactively kept myself from falling into that while learning about cognitive function. But like people forget that typing people is not always complicated. Now, cognitive functions are complicated, but sometimes it's really simple to type people. Some people are just really easy to type. Um, but I complete beginners are better at typing celebrities and fictional people, and they can be better at typing people in general sometimes than people that have been learning about cognitive functions because like they kind of just go like a big part of typing people. There is a certain vibe for certain types. Now you're not supposed to go off a vibe because you're not supposed to like type people solely on vibes, right? Because there's no like logic backing it up. It's just like, oh, I just kind of feel like that person's that type. So there's nothing really to prove that. So like that's not good to do. But sometimes just going off a vibe is like that cuts it all all the BS out the way. And like so like beginners, they don't got all this information floating around in their heads about this cognitive function technically is like this, technically this cognitive function does this. So they can just literally just look at the person as they are and kind of just go off of the vibe and then go off the vibe of whatever types they learn about, and then they'll be right more times than sometimes people who've been learning about cognitive functions for a while, which is crazy. But like, yeah, and then I go look at people that know cognitive functions. They typing lists of us all over the place because they just kind of like I feel like they kind of just isolate one function at a time and then try to just go off it like that when it's like um and then it's like they kind of miss the point. It's like they focusing on the little tiny little details of this function, that function, and they didn't miss the complete point. And they like not really understanding the person they're analyzing either too well. I think that's a part of it. Part of it is just like not understanding people and why they do the things they do. And then like, yeah, that's another part of it. But people forget, like typing people is really not that complicated a lot of times. Um, because one thing, because you know, I came up with this method called the cancel out method. I made a video about this some years back, right? But really, like, I started realizing, like, if you figure out something for sure, like cognitive function wise or whatever, if you figure out something for sure in somebody, it cancels out so many other types. So, like, if you notice that somebody, for example, is an extrovert thinking dom, and it's like super obvious, it just cancels out because there's only two types that can be extroverted thinking doms: ESTJ, ENTJ. That cancels out uh 14 other types. Um, that's an example right there. Like little stuff like that. Um, but yeah, with that being said, that can simplify quite a lot. But you got to be sure about it, though. You know what I'm saying? It's not like you can, go off of it if it's like something you're not quite sure about. And that's not that. That's where you can use multiple methods at once. But like, and then like, I think a big part of it too is people just don't have a solid grasp on the core of certain types. They looking at the cognitive function, like, yeah, this cognitive function does this and that. But look at the overall type as a whole. What are some core things about that type? Not just the cognitive functions of that type, even though that is the makeup of it. But it's like, if I had to describe it, it's like, okay, people that just go off cognitive function and ignore everything else. When typing people, they don't consider anything else. It's like, it's like looking and trying to decipher what something is by looking at it through a microscope. When if you zoomed out, you could see what the object actually is. Like if I tried to look at um, I'm trying to think of an example. Uh, I'm just looking at something in the environment. I don't know. It could be anything really. Like this controller. If I tried to figure out what this controller was by zooming in with a microscope, I'm not gonna know what it is. I can see maybe some of the components of you know, of it. Or if I zoomed in closely at a certain part of this, I could see some of the components of the makeup of it. But like, what is that really? You know what I'm saying? Versus if you just zoomed out and look at the whole thing as a whole, you know it's a controller. I mean, that wasn't a perfect analogy, but you kind of get what I'm saying. Like if you zoom in and just look at the parts of something, um, let's say if I just zoomed in and look at all the parts that make up a controller, like I took the controller apart and laid all the parts out. Would you necessarily know that that's a controller? No, unless you know how to build a controller or something like that. You're not gonna know that's a controller. Now, if you put them all together and look at the thing as a whole, okay, yeah, that's a controller. It's obvious, and it doesn't take that much thought. Versus, like, even if you knew that was a controller, it would take a little bit more effort for you to realize that's a controller. You know what I'm saying? Or you could mistake it as something else when it's taken apart, but when you put it together and just look at it as a whole, it's easy to distinguish what it is. That's kind of what. That's a great analogy for it. I think that that might be part of why some of these people that like they get super just technical about this function, that function, this function, and then this be completely wrong, missing the entire point. It's like they get all the details, but the whole point. They just missing the whole point. This happens so often. I've seen like people that are like super like, oh, I'm an expert on all the cognitive functions, and they just horrible at type of people. Strangest phenomenon ever. Um, and it's not a knock at nobody, nothing like that. I'm just pointing out something that happens. But yeah, this stuff is not um, type of people really. isn't that complicated. I'm not saying it's easy. Type people is very difficult and it can be very tricky. But as far as it being like complicated, a lot of times it can be very simple. Now, I'm not saying every single time, but there's a lot of people who are very tricky to type because people adapt in certain ways to whatever living situation or wherever they grew up at or whatever. Like people adapt in many different ways and unique ways. So it can get really tricky and stuff like that. But as far as it being overly complex, not all the time. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes it's just super simple and like people overcomplicate it. Sometimes also people are just biased. They want somebody to be a certain type because they view a certain type a certain way. It's more of a personal thing, but like it may not be necessarily true about how that type actually shows up. It's just because they feel like that type is a certain way and they're just biased. But yeah, bro. And then sometimes with the bias, they'll use cognitive function to back up their bias instead of looking at it objectively and in an unbiased, the most unbiased way they can. Which is what that happens probably more than likely when people are mistyping other people. But yeah, anyways, that's kind of all I want to say about that. Um, yeah, thanks for watching.